Good afternoon. This is Dr. John Bennett of InternetMedicine.com. We have in the Artificial Intelligence channel the pleasure of having Chen Kuan, the CEO of Infervision, based in, I believe in China. They're expanding to the States, and we're going to learn a lot about a subject that's very interesting to many people. Many people like us, like me, really don't know much about it and like to hear the story and what's behind the company and everything else. Chen is going to do a presentation. Then after that, we're going to open up for questions from me or anybody else that wants to tweet. Good day, Chen. Welcome.
Hello. It's a great honor to be here.
Okay, very good. Okay, you can go into your presentation now if you'd like.
Yes, sure. So I'm just going to go through my presentation introducing my company, InfoVision, to you guys. And then you guys can stop me for any question in the process, or we can talk after the presentation.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, so let me go to my PPT first.
Okay. There you go. Perfect, perfect.
Yes, so InfoVision, we basically do deep learning on radiology in China. And so let me just tell you a little bit of our story. And it's going to be divided into a few parts. I'm just going to describe the problem of Chinese radiology first to you guys, and then I'm just going to present a few attempted solutions, and then which leads to our story, the story of InfoVision. So first of all, this is actually a picture of a typical hospital in China. As you can see, all these patients lining up, waiting to see a doctor and waiting to see a radiologist. So for the point of view of a patient, normally when we go to a hospital in China, we have to wait hours in order to see a doctor. And sometimes when we see a doctor, we do not get very good service because the doctor is extremely busy. And for a radiologist report, for example, when we had an X-ray or CT scan, we normally have to wait 2 to 3 days to get back the result. So in the meanwhile, it's actually a very frustrating process to wait for it in the hospital. While from the perspective of a doctor, they also feel that they are actually heavily overworked, heavily underpaid, and they also face a lot of pressure, like working as a doctor in China. And sometimes they actually fall victim to brutal crime committed by frustrating patient families. So what we see here is that the patients are unhappy, and we also see that the doctors are very unhappy in the process. So what is the actual problem here? So I think the actual problem is that there's a huge shortage of radiologists or doctors in China. So basically, that's the reason why patients feel that they do not get a well-qualified quality service, while for doctors and for radiologists, they feel that they actually work day and night. So why is there a huge shortage of doctors in China? So here, I'm actually comparing the average pay of a physician in China and a physician in the US. You can see the huge income differential between the two groups. And no wonder there's a huge shortage here. And for the field of radiology, we can see that for a US radiologist, the average income is $375,000 US dollars. And for radiologists in China, the corresponding number is 78,000 Chinese yuan. So converting an exchange rate, we actually have a more than 30 times differential between a radiologist in the US and a radiologist in China. And in addition, for example, InfoVision, we have been working extensively with different radiologists in the past. And we find that they're actually a very hardworking group of people. For example, for a typical radiologist, he normally has to go through more than 200 X-ray images per day or more than 60 CT scans per day. So for those of you who are not very familiar with the field of radiologists, so this is a typical CT scan. Basically, what you are looking at is the lung of a patient, and you can see the two halves of the lung. And for a CT scan, we're actually looking at the voxel like in three-dimensional forms. So we're actually seeing the lung from an axial view that is going from top to bottom. In these cases, for a normal 1.25 millimeter scan, we can actually have more than 250 to 300 slices for each single patient. And for a radiologist to go through a patient, normally he has to start from one half of the lung and then go to the other half again. and then switch the color scheme, which is so-called window width and window level in the language of radiologists, and then go through the right lung, go through the left lung all over again. So for one particular patient, normally a radiologist has to go through more than 1,000 slices in order to find, in order to look for something that is going wrong. And in addition, a lot of the things that we have been looking for inside lung are actually very difficult to see. For example, nodules, which are like early stage cancers, are very difficult to tell in comparison with a normal blood vessel from a two-dimensional point of view. For example, for the 6 boxes that I circled here, actually one of them is a nodule, and the other 5 are normal blood vessels. So actually, you can see that this red one here is a true nodule, but it looks almost exactly the same as the other 5 normal blood vessels. So a doctor often have to scroll up and down for a few times in order to see the problem here. And in addition, for some of the symptoms, it is actually very light and very difficult to distinguish. For example, this is what we call ground glass nodule because it's actually very light. The color transition is very smooth, and it's very easy to miss when you are actually scrolling through the slices very quickly. So some of the radiologists complain that sometimes they scroll their mouse too quickly, and they can miss very light symptoms like this. But at the same time, ground glass nodule has a 59% chance of turning into a malignant tumor in China. So all these symptoms are actually quite important to detect. So actually, I compared the survival rate of different stages of cancer in China. So basically what we have is that stage 1 cancer has a more than 80% survival rate, while a stage 4 cancer has a less than 20% survival rate. In that sense, the work of radiologists has a great impact on the survival rate of a patient. And take a case of lung cancer, it's already killing 500,000 population in China annually. So actually, we see that if you can help radiologists diagnose more accurately and more efficiently, I think we can save millions of lives in the process. And I just present to you the case of a large hospitals in which we have a higher concentration of radiologists. So they basically work extremely hard trying to finish the day work. But then for small rural clinics in China, we basically do not have qualified radiologists at all. So for a patient living in rural cities in China, they often have to wait until they feel too painful to work, or maybe they can feel a mass inside their body before they actually travel to large metropolitans in China, for example, like Beijing, Shanghai, to do a full diagnosis. But oftentimes it's actually too late to do anything about it. So we see that there is this huge shortage of radiologists, and it's impacting a lot of livelihoods in China. So there are some attempted solutions. One of the very big one, especially a few years back, is called telemedicine. So in China, like internet goliaths and entrepreneurs alike have been trying to use internet to solve the problem of the Chinese medical industry. So the basic idea is to create an internet platform to bring doctors and bring patients and other medical resources online so that it can be distributed far and wide. So I think it definitely helps in terms of letting the resource distribute more evenly inside China. But the problem is that internet actually does not solve the most fundamental problem of shortage of supply. And so what we see in the past few years is that like most of the internet telemedicine companies did not live up to the expectation of a lot of venture capitalists, which funded them in the first place. And that's exactly because some of the doctors are already very busy trying to finish their day works in the hospital. So they do not have any extra resource and time to spend on the internet platform. So that's why I say that internet cannot solve a shortage of supply problem, the most fundamental problem in the medical industry of China. But I think that's exactly an area in which deep learning and AI can create the greatest value. So basically, it can actually help solve the problem of shortage of supply, I think. And this brings us to our story, the story of InfoVision. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the beginning of InfoVision and the challenge we face in the process, and also the progress we made at this point. And then lastly, I'm just going to look forward to what we try to achieve in the future. So right from the beginning, I was actually a PhD student in the year of 2012 in the University of Chicago with my little cat here. And it was a very peaceful learning period for me. And during my PhD program, I was very interested to see like all these new machine learning models, for example, deep neural networks, how it can be applied to, for example, economics and financial and also political outcomes. So what I did in 2012 with some of my friends from U Chicago and MIT was that we actually used Twitter data to predict the election outcome of the election outcome between Romney and Obama, and we correctly predicted that Obama has a edge, at least from the perspective of the Twitter data. And then at the time, I was also very interested to see what some other areas in which deep learning can be applied. So with that question in mind, during my PhD years, I actually went back to China to search for areas in which I can actually apply deep learning. So at that time, I actually talked to quite a lot of different industries, and I actually talked to different people to see their demand and to see their pain. Uh, so during one of my presentation, when I was doing a facial recognition demo in 2014, one of the radiologists in China actually came up to me and she said that all this demo on facial recognition is very cool, but do you think that you can use this technology to help us radiologists to solve a problem? And she basically told me that how hardworking they are and is how easy it is for them to misdiagnose when they are very tired in the afternoon after seeing through thousands of image. So basically, that's the time when I heard this demand, and I talked to different radiologists and different hospital staff, hospital executives, and in the process, I think they basically give me the exact same demand. So that's the time when I think that this is actually an industry in which deep learning can create a huge value. And then at that time, I basically suspended my PhD and flew back with my cat to China to start InfoVision full time. And that was the end of 2014. So basically, in early 2015, I actually started to talk to different hospitals to see if I can partner with them. But quite unlike right now, in which deep learning is a very hot topic and everybody is talking about AI and deep learning. In 2015, in the medical industry of China, literally nobody has actually heard of deep learning. So they actually are very interested in some new concepts and new technologies, but none of the hospitals are willing to partner with a team that they has never heard of. And in addition, actually, some of the doctors that I talked to have actually seen like artificial intelligence in pre-deep learning era. So for those of you not very familiar, so deep learning in medical image has been here for quite some time. And what we have is that it's actually the old name is called computer-aided diagnosis, which is called CADE system. So the CAD system did not live up to the doctors' expectation when it first came by 20 years ago. It has a lot of hype around it, and a lot of doctors actually put in quite some effort trying to support the system, support the technology. But at the end, it turned out rather disappointing. The result was disappointing to a lot of doctors. So when some of these doctors who have actually seen the traditional artificial intelligence system, and they were actually quite disappointed and quite disillusioned with it, they also feel that deep learning will do no difference. And so it actually gave me a lot of pressure and say that, well, I have seen this before, and I don't think it's going to work at all. So I think that sometimes disillusionment is actually worse than ignorance. But even in those times, there's still visionaries in the like traditional industry in which they are actually willing to support innovative and support risky endeavors. And that's the time in which we actually find our first partner, Sichuan People's Hospital. And so basically the hospital are willing to partner with us and open up their IT system so that we can actually let our deep learning model learn from the past radiologist data. And it's actually quite a God bless for that time, because all we have was a idea to do deep learning on radiology, and all we have is just some modeling techniques in which we can apply. But we did not have large amount of training data. And that's why we actually need to find large institutions which can provide the initial recipe to do deep learning. So basically, we got started in the Sichuan People's Hospital, and We always thought that building deep learning was actually a very cool stuff, like a hacker, like doing all this very cool programming. But the actual truth is that most of the time we are doing hard work and dirty work. For example, like data cleaning and doing all these connections between data tables within the hospital IT system, and we fine tune the deep learning models. So unfortunately, like 90% of the time has to be spent on all this dirty work in order for the model to show any effect at all. But then they are actually very important. And in addition, there are also challenges that are associated with hospital IT environment in the process. So for example, when we are in a hospital, the system stability, data privacy, and security are highly valued. So if we do not write our programs properly, sometimes we can actually crash the IT system of the hospital. We came close a few times in the past, and it is actually a taboo in the IT environment because you need a very stable environment to support everything that's going on in the hospital. And at the same time, data privacy and security are also extremely important in the hospital IT system. So for example, we normally have to actually write our programs, and then we have to send the programs over to the hospital IT staff for security clearance. And we have to wait for a few days before the clearance come back and we install the program onto our server and to upgrade our system. So it was actually a much slower process as compared to other types of development. But this is actually very necessary because we are actually talking about like data privacy and security that is within a hospital system. So in those like times, we actually had a hard time. We struggle, we stumble, but at the same time, we also had quite a lot of fun. We enjoyed ourselves in the process, and we also made quite a lot of mistakes in the process. So once we had all this hard work, like data cleaning, data pre-processing, training the model, and letting the model learn like a radiologist, actually is the easy part. So the basic idea is that our very first model, what we did is we trained the deep learning model to actually predict like a radiologist to distinguish between a normal, a healthy, and an unhealthy X-ray. The idea is to screen out the healthy ones so that radiologists do not have to spend so much time on these healthy ones, so that they can spend more time focusing on unhealthy ones, to save them time and help them diagnose more efficiently. And this was actually one of our first model that we ran in Sichuan People's Hospital. And our first successful model like got to a 90% accuracy, like with 90% sensitivity and 90% specificity, right around that, in matter of minutes. So once we set up all the data pre-processing, data cleaning, and the models, once they start to learn, actually it gets to a junior resident level of doing this in matter of minutes. When in the beginning it's just making random guesses. So it was actually quite a magical moment for us. So let me explain a little bit deeper into some characteristics and challenges of doing medical image deep learning from our perspective. So basically, we see that for a medical image, it normally has very high resolution and very high dimension. And a lot of times you had a area, the pathological areas are often very small as compared to the image that we are looking at. And at the end, like deep learning, although it's extremely cool, right now it's still pretty much a black box. We don't really understand why deep learning is making all the predictions that it is. And last but not least, we find that high quality annotation in medical image are actually very difficult to come by. And it is also very important to for building a complete and very comprehensive deep learning model. So let me go a little bit deeper into each of this. So for example, for some of the normal deep learning use cases that we see in a artificial intelligence point of view, the resolution of the picture is no larger than 299 times 299. But for a medical image, for example, the size of an X-ray is normally like 3K times 3K. And for CT, the resolution is 512 times 512 times, like for example, 200 to 300. So the resolution and the dimensions are much higher as compared to the normal ImageNet applications. Furthermore, as we have seen, some of the symptoms are very small, hiding inside 3 dimensions. And so basically what we have is that we have a very huge amount of information, and then the areas in which we are interested to locate are actually hiding very small inside this information. So this actually creates a huge pressure for the deep learning model to find all these areas. In addition, when a doctor makes diagnosis, often he has to rely on heuristic information, like, for example, the location of the problem, the shape of the problem, the size of the problem, the boundary, in order to decide things like, for example, if it is malignant or not. But when deep learning makes a prediction, it just turns out the prediction without being able to explain to the humans what is really going on. So for a doctor, if he cannot understand exactly why the prediction was made, there will be no way for him to explain the prediction to the patients as well. So this actually creates a problem. And also, like, high quality annotation is also very difficult to obtain, because, for example, like for general purpose recognition problem and detection problem, we can just ask graduate students, or we can just ask anyone to, for example, to point out where is the car, where is the dog, where is the glass of water. It's very easy to annotate them. But for medical image, when you ask someone who has never trained in radiologist, where is the nodule, it's actually, there's basically no way for them to do this job. So we need highly trained doctors and radiologists to do annotation, but then it's going to be very costly and very difficult. But then annotated data are also very important in order to build a functioning detection or segmentation deep learning models. So, and furthermore, we also find that for different doctors and different hospitals, they can have drastically different diagnostic standards. So for the same medical image, sometimes like two different doctors can have completely different interpretations, and they can be both right and they can be both wrong. So this actually also create this lack of gold standard also sometimes also create a great problem when we are doing medical image training. So last but not least, it's also very important to have robustness. So what I mean by robustness is that when we are building a industry-grade deep learning model, what we want is that this deep learning model can perform reliably and safely in different environments, regardless of the CT machine that we use, regardless of the hospital that it occurs, and regardless of the patient's demographics. So we cannot have, like, for example, one model that seems to work in one hospital, and then when we move the model to another hospital, it simply failed to recognize a very sizable tumor. So we need the model to be reliable. In other words, we need it to be robust. But this is also one area in which I think academia is not paying enough attention to. So basically, that's one difficulty in doing deep learning in the medical image. We need it to be very reliable in order to apply it. So basically, what we did, how do we tackle all this problem? So I think for us, we choose to build a team of people who has a very strong learning capability and can cross the aisle to learn different things. For example, you can see from the WeChat conversation that took place among our company. If you look at the content here, you might think that this is actually a conversation that is basically going on among the doctors inside our company. But this is actually not true. This is actually a group of deep learning engineers that are within our companies, and the conversation took place among them. So what happened is that in order to build good models, in order to build better like deep learning models to diagnose medical image, they find that they have to read, and they find that they have to read like a professional radiologist. And that's why they actually took the time to learn a lot of radiology concept and to learn to read the medical image, just like a professional radiologist. So basically, I always joke with them that if one day our company go bankrupt, they can at least find job working as a radiologist in the hospital. And secondly, it's always good to have large amounts of data. And that's one part in which, for example, in China, it has a huge advantage of. For example, one of the biggest hospitals that we work with, Wuhan Tongji Hospital, it basically has more than 20,000 patients each day and generating more than 3,000 to 4,000 medical image just in one single day. So all this image can be used to train a model, and it definitely helps to have this very large amount of data when we talk about deep learning. And also, it's also very important that we have like very frequent and very in-depth communication with radiologists, because only doctors can give us very solid and concrete use cases and to give us very concrete feedbacks on our products and our algorithms. So basically, we actually hold very frequent conversation with our users and with the radiologists that we work with. And since like I'm actually talking in the GTC conference, which is the GPU technology conference, let me just say that it's also very important to have very strong hardware, in which when you have different hardware specs, you can see that this is actually the computation time for the same model using different hardware specs. And you can see with the right hardware spec, it's going to save a lot of time for the model to learn, for the model to train. So let me just show you some very interesting attempts that we have been doing. So for example, what you're looking at is the X-ray image of a hip joint. And a very frequent problem associated with it is actually called the femoral degeneration, which happens around the hip joint area. And we actually apply a very popular deep learning model called, which actually asks the deep learning model to focus its attention onto the image to see what if there's anything wrong with it. And so what we have here is actually a computed attention graph for the hip joint. And you can see that the deep learning model actually focus on the problematic areas of the hip joint and correctly. So it's just like a human. So when we are actually diagnosing a medical image, normally we do not focus on the entire image, but we put our focus onto like the important areas. And that's exactly what the model was doing. And in addition, we actually can let the model to predict, for example, in a CT scan, there is three-dimensional, which slice it has the tumor. So basically, you can see from the plot on the right that the output is actually a prediction made by the deep learning model to predict where the nodule is. And it correctly predicted the slices, the actual slices where the nodule is. And so this is just a very quick illustration of our products in which we can just highlight the nodules, highlight the problems inside the lung for the radiologist. And then the radiologist can just click through the nodules, and then the report can be generated automatically so that we can save time for the radiologist and also help them diagnose more accurately in the process. So basically from 2014, 2015, from nobody, we managed to partner with bigger and better hospitals. And also, we are also lucky enough to get invested by some of the top VCs in China and in the world, for example, like Sequoia Capital. And some of our users and also some top experts in the field has been voluntarily sharing our products and sharing the usage of our technology inside the top conferences in radiologists. So basically, we are lucky enough to have them as our partners. So back to the beginning, when a doctor make a diagnosis from a medical image, normally he has to distinguish between whether the patient is healthy or not. And if the image shows unhealthy symptoms, he normally has to go to the second stage in which to detect the location of the disease, to highlight it. And last but not least, the doctor has to judge the nature of the disease. For example, to see if the nodule is malignant or if it is benign and what to do with it. So these are the three stages of a diagnosis for radiologists. And for us, our product actually integrate into this procedure. For example, for our AIDR product, which I've shown you before, we quickly actually screen out the healthy ones so that the doctors do not have to spend so much time working on them. And furthermore, for the unhealthy ones, we actually highlight and actually generate the report for the doctors, the preliminary report, so that they can actually edit it and can save them time like checking through the image and also save them time writing out the report. And so the same goes for a CT scan here. So basically, for CT scan, we actually highlight the location of the nodule, and we actually generate a report for them. And for some of the very difficult cases, our our models and our products actually perform reliably well with high robustness. So for example, you are seeing here is a very tiny nodule and another upper nodule that is hiding right beside the blood vessel. That is actually very easy for human radiologists to miss. But our models still manage to find them. For example, this one is also a nodule that is hiding right beside blood vessel. And you see this very tiny one here, this ground glass nodule that is extremely light. And you see this multiple nodules that is inside the lung. And so this was one of the cases that we have when our model first went online in a Chinese hospital. So initially, when presented with this X-ray, the radiologist basically gave the diagnosis of having no obvious opacity in the lung. So in other words, they think that he's pretty much normal. But then our system actually highlighted this part of the lung. And so in our recommendation, the patient went for a CT scan. And the result came back to say that it's actually a ground glass nodule inside the lung. And the biopsy shows that it's actually a malignant tumor. It's actually a lung cancer. So another case also shows a very similar effect. Interestingly, you can see that the two bottom nodules that we highlighted are actually not exactly nodules. These are actually what we so-called false positive. So it is actually turns out that they are actually nipple shadows. The nipples of the patients actually went into the medical image. But then because from a imaging perspective, they look exactly like a nodule. So our system still recommend them, and we leave it for the doctors to make the final judgment. But then for the upper nodule, we actually, once again, in our recommendation, we actually asked the patient to do a CT scan. It turns out that once again, it's a lung cancer. So basically, this was what we have done in the past. So we will not stop at doing preventive medicine or screening like I presented you. We actually plan to go deep into assisting doctors in different stages of their diagnosis. For example, for clinical medicine, we can assist doctors in their daily clinical work. And then we also want to go into basic medical sciences and precision medicine, in which we can combine different data sources, not limited to medical image, so that we can make a more comprehensive and more complete diagnosis for the doctors. So what I see in the future is that doctors and basically machines, they can improve each other, they can empower each other, so that we can have a more complete diagnosis for the patient. So basically, that's a overview introduction of InfoVision. And I think it takes some time, so I'll open up for any questions that we have.
Well, very good, Chen. Excellent presentation. Good illustrations. And you know, you can get off the screen. There you go. It's certainly an area, like you said, that's hot. And I'm like a lot of people. I don't know too much about it, but I did a little research before talking to you. And you mentioned this. One of the things that I was surprised at, it's been around for a while, artificial intelligence, but it just hasn't got any traction yet, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
It seems. Well, I'm sure everyone's heard of Deep Blue, how the computer beat Deep Blue, but from my reading, it said that it really started making progress once that Go player lost to the computer, because it showed that the computer could think more like a human.
Yes.
Whereas, tell me if I'm wrong, whereas the
Yes.
Deep Blue is only so many positions and that's it. Whereas with Go, it's unlimited, and the
Yes.
computer really has to think. Can you explain that a little bit better?
Yes. So I would just try to explain it from the perspective of my field, for example, in medical image diagnosis. So what we have in the past is that we always have some medical AI that's going around. For example, from the University of Chicago, which is my home school, we have like R2 technology. That's one of the earliest commercial med AI that's going around. But it does not employ deep learning. So it actually, for the old computer-aided diagnosis system, it actually has a combination of what we call an expert system and a data-driven system. So the basic idea is that, for example, when I want to make a prediction, or if I want to make a diagnosis, I actually have to, for example, ask around the experts in this particular field. For example, if I want to make a lung nodule prediction,
Mhm.
I will actually gather, like for example, 100 lung experts, and we will ask them, like, what makes you think that this is a nodule, and what makes you think that this is a blood vessel, which is not a nodule? And they will give all their ideas, and computer scientists will try to convert all these ideas into systems in which the computer can understand. And then we
Okay.
have a diagnosis system. So this is what we call an expert system that incorporates humans' intelligence into it. But the problem with this particular type of traditional technology is that there's always a limitation of what humans can describe in words and for the computer to convert. So what we have is that we have a very limited set of rules, and then it cannot kind of incorporate into all these possibilities that can go on in the real world. But then for deep learning, when learning came around, they say that, well, we don't need to do that. Basically what we want is that you just provide us with the data. For example, like AlphaGo, like not in the past, all these artificial intelligence Go players needs to have the training from human. But AlphaGo came along and said, no, you just don't give me all this training. What you give me is just all the past data of all the Go games. And I can learn from all the Go games and then to summarize and to have the what I think are important based on my own summary without much human intervention. So this also goes for example, for a computer-aided diagnosis in which we just give the deep learning model the past data, the past diagnosis data, without telling it what to look for.
Mhm.
Will basically try to summarize and try to find out exactly what to look for. And it turns out that this way of doing it based on huge amount of data without too much human intervention turns out to be far superior to the old ways in which we have expert system. And that's basically a brief comparison of the two. Yeah.
Yeah, the analysis of data. In
Yes,
many
yes,
areas of
yes.
medicine, computers has allowed that. Where in the old days, before computers, you couldn't analyze that. You wouldn't have the man hours to
Yeah,
analyze it. But computers are getting so powerful now; they're going to analyze, as you know, very, very quickly. Now, I
yes,
know that
exactly.
you explained how you got into radiology about your aunt being sick and having a lesion, and the hospitals being overbooked, and you met that radiologist who mentioned it. Um, is it any accident that artificial intelligence seems to be getting the most traction in radiology? Can you say a reason for that?
Yes. So in the year of 2015, when I first got started, most of the doctors and most of the hospitals do not believe that this can actually make a fundamental difference, unlike today. So I think the most fundamental events in which that changed their perception, I think, is AlphaGo, because they have actually seen that even in a problem as difficult as a Go playing, um, actually a computer with the right amount of training can actually beat a world champion like Lisadol.
Right.
So I think there was quite a big event in China, and a lot of like live reporting and live commentators like basically broadcast the event throughout the country. And I think that gives really a good shake up to a lot of the perceptions in China. And
Right.
suddenly the perception becomes that, well, this is somewhat inevitable, it will come along. So maybe, like, instead of like waiting for it to come to defend it, maybe I should embrace it and see if, like, we can together shape the future of radiologists. So basically that's the big change.
Do you think that artificial intelligence is further advanced in China than it is in the United States?
I mean, I haven't really compared like very detail in
Right.
great detail, but certainly there are some advantage in doing, for example, artificial intelligence or deep learning in China due to the sheer size of the data in China. Take the
Right.
example of my field, for example. Chinese hospitals are simply huge, actually way bigger than most of the hospitals in the U.S.
Okay.
And then the numbers, the data are actually huge. And for example, for the data that we look at in China, a lot of the hospitals have been installing their IT infrastructure right around the time of 2002 and 2003. That's during a time in which, right after the SARS outbreak, the government realized that it's actually very difficult to track an outbreak if you do not have a functioning IT system within those hospitals. So
Right.
actually, So basically, there's a huge wave to actually install all this IT infrastructure. And so when we actually get to the hospital in the year of 2015, what we are seeing is that a lot of hospitals have like image archives and IT systems that is actually going around for like more than 10 years. And all this data, all this huge amount of data have been sitting there, like nobody has been using it. And the hospitals also do not know how to like how to create any value from it. So
Right.
in a lot of sense, we are the first one to mine the data, and they are quite treasurable in terms of deep learning.
From a little bit of reading I've done about it, it seems that it's making some progress in pathology because
Yes.
of the reasons that you said. It deals mostly with images.
Yes.
Can you comment on that?
Yes. So pathology is also another very interesting areas in which we can apply deep learning, because almost everything that we need to decide, make a judgment, are actually within the boundary of the information set within the image. So what we have is, by looking at the image alone, we can already determine like what the problem is. So that's exactly the area in which deep learning thrives. So you do not need any outside information. You can just learn from past amount of data. And especially in China, like pathologists are actually even like in greater greater short supply as compared to a radiologist in China. Yeah, so I think there's also another field in which that a lot of great, interesting ideas can come out. Yeah.
Right. You're busy enough with radiology. I guess you can't worry about that now, correct?
Yes. So we run some models on pathology, but we haven't had any products on it yet. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I'm interested when I read that you're getting funded by Sequoia. That's probably one of the biggest, most well-established investment firms in Silicon Valley. Were you nervous
Yes.
before that presentation?
Uh, yeah. So basically, like I wasn't very familiar with I mean, we actually had one round of funding before Sequoia, but then
Right.
I don't think that I'm very good at talking to investors at those points. So I was
Okay.
very nervous, but I find out that like the partners inside Sequoia, at least in China, which are the ones I talk to, they're actually very humble and they're actually willing to learn new things. For example, at the
Okay.
time, they might not know much about deep learning, but they learn very quickly, and they are also like very courteous. So actually, it actually helps in the process to communicate with them.
Yeah, I guess you basically have to educate them because if physicians don't know what it is, how would an investor know what it is? So you
Yes,
must have
yes.
to start almost at the beginning.
Yes, yes, right, right, right. So I think I'm very surprised that they are very interested, and then so the entire process are very quick. So the time when we actually first contact with Sequoia, and then the time between the time they actually invested the money, invested the cash, is actually only 21 days, which is very fast for our rounds.
Wow,
So,
that is fast. But you've been working on this for a while. Now,
yeah,
certainly, pathology and radiology, the image based, and it's fairly easy to see why it's applicable.
yes.
Can you see other areas of medicine where you think it might have applicability?
Yes. So let me just start with what we are doing right now. So for medical image, for example, like radiologists, we most of the information are inside the image. But I think like sometimes we can actually incorporate a lot more into the image. So for example, like some of the good radiologists, normally they do not rely on the image alone. They will also have to incorporate other information, for example, whether the patient smoke and the age of the patient and other questions into his decision process. And sometimes they actually have to go back to the DNA information to actually rely on those information too. So I think a very immediate way in which we can expand our technology is exactly to incorporate all this data from different departments of the hospitals and see if we can actually give a more comprehensive and more complete diagnosis for the doctors. So I think that's one area in which outside of image we can actually do a lot.
Does someone have to annotate that information onto the image
Uh,
also, or the data file of a study, a scan?
yes, yes. So basically, like even though it's quite natural to think of all this data that's happening inside the hospital, but the actual truth is that most of the data are actually very chaotic, and we have
Right.
to make quite a lot of time. We have spent a lot of time to make sense of the data, And sometimes we have to bring in radiologists, professional radiologists, to help us annotate and understand the data in their spare time. So I think that's the part in which we have been doing a lot of hard work, but it's also quite necessary to build a good model.
Well, you know, to me, I interviewed a gentleman from Nuance Communication,
Mhm.
and he just happened to mention, yeah, we're putting AI into the EMRs.
Oh, nice.
I stopped and said, whoa, that's a big, to him, it wasn't a big step, but to me, it
Yeah.
seems like inserting AI into a medical record. Whoa,
Yeah,
when did
yeah.
that happen? When did that happen? That was to me, that was like a huge step. How can you just mention it like it's nothing? It's big.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's difficult. Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
But
Uh, yeah. So, for
go ahead.
example, when we work with radiologists, sometimes even though our product is good, it still takes some time for them to understand it, to accept it, and to integrate it into their normal procedure. Because you see, like diagnosis and treatment, they are all very like well functioning like procedures that's been going on for quite some years. So right now you have an AI system, you want to insert it in the middle. It's going to take a lot of hard work and it's going to take a lot of time. So I think you've been right to say that it's actually definitely a very big thing. So yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah. One thing that surprised me a lot was to see the progress that robotics has made
Yes.
in surgery, because surgery is known to be a very conservative field where they don't change things very quickly. But in urology, they're using the Da Vinci robotic machine, which I never thought surgeons would do that. It would take them a long time.
Yes.
But
Yes.
for them to make that big step of using a machine like that to do for surgery,
Yes.
uh, that surprised me in such a conservative area of medicine as surgery.
Yes, yes. It also gives us quite a lot of confidence that we will be able to do it in the field of radiologists just by looking at the progress that, for example, Da Vinci machine has made in the past. Yeah, so I just think that there are areas in which, for example, machines are more are better to do are better than human. For example, like they can operate more precisely and they can make all these tiny moves without like shaking. And these are actually not what humans are built to do in the first place. And so the
Mhm.
same goes for example, in the field of radiology, in which like 80 to 90% of the time, a radiologist has to go into, for example, looking at very small nodules. It's actually not difficult. It's just extremely tedious to do. And when
Right,
they're tired, it's easy to miss them. So I
right.
think these are also the parts in which humans are not built to do and machines should strive at. But there are also areas I think in which like machines will never be able to replace human. For example, when sometimes you need human creativity. For example, when a surgeon he has never seen the case before and he still know how to design a surgery to remove something that he has never seen. Or maybe a radiologist he has never seen this case before, but he can make a connection just by, for example, remembering something that for example, his professor has said in a long time ago. So I
Hmm.
think those are areas in which machine will never be able to be better than human. And so I
Hmm.
think it's actually always a good thing that for the two to work together in the future. Yeah.
Hmm. So use it like a kind of a tool, accessory
Yes,
tool.
yes, yes. I
Is
think
that
one
how?
of the
Okay, go ahead.
yes,
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
yes, yes. That's exactly some of the doctors that we work with. Actually, one of the doctor actually told me this. Uh, so basically, what he thinks that in the future, the machine, the AI, will basically behave like a resident, like an assistant to the doctor. And the thing is that who would not want an assistant besides? So basically, you can help with all this hard work, all this tedious work, and they can focus on the harder part, the more creative part, and the part in which we need more depth into it.
Hmm. Yeah, personally, I think AI is going to be huge. You know, I'm working with a Chinese company now, Sandbot. I don't know if you've heard of that robotics company.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, they incorporate AI into little robots, and
Mhm.
to me, I see it as, like you say, an assistant to
Yes,
the doctor. They're able to retrieve records. They're able to put PowerPoint presentations on the wall about
yes,
what the
yes,
patient is going through. They may be able to assist the busy doctor, just like they're busy in China. We got some really busy ones here. They don't
Yes.
have, they have like an average of maybe 7 minutes to a patient.
Yes,
And
yes,
during that
exactly.
7 minutes, they have to, you know, educate the patient. You really don't have time to
Yeah,
educate
yeah,
the
exactly,
patient.
exactly. Yeah, exactly.
But maybe the robots can assist in doing that, and can assist on giving patient instructions to give the doctor more time to concentrate on the pathology, like you said, for radiologists to concentrate on the pathology and not the paperwork and not the other
Yes, exactly, exactly.
extraneous stuff.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. Yeah.
well, it's a true pleasure meeting you, Chen. I hope to see a lot more. And any ideas you have, we'll be glad to put you or any of your team on the screen. I hope you can put this in your portfolio of your website.
Of course, we will.
And congratulations on all your work.
Thank you very much. It's a great conversation.
You seem to be doing some really positive stuff. So let me
Thank
end
you very
the
much.
broadcast, and I'll chat with you in a sec.
Okay, thank you very much.